Please welcome on stage Stephen Watson.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm not sure what you mean about not promoting it. I'm going to promote the hell out of it for the next 20 minutes.
Just do it. Just do it.
So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Juris, and everyone for having me here today. My name is Stephen Watson, and I run Stack. Oops. There we go, Stack. Which is a subscription service for independent magazines. So as you just heard, we send out a different one every month. You never know what you're going to get next, but you know it's going to be this beautiful, intelligent magazine that you probably wouldn't have heard before. And speaking of magazines and whether you've heard of them before, how many in the room know Benji Newman? Yeah, okay. Well, you have to know it. So I'm here today thanks to Agnes, who's sitting here, who is the editor of Benji Newman, which, for those of you who don't know, is a very wonderful independent magazine made right here in Riga. And it's a fantastic example of the sort of magazine that I love to send out, because when you try to describe what this magazine is about, I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Like there's no sense to what Benji Newman is. It's a very beautiful exploration of people's normal lives and kind of the things that make people who they are. And I think the best way to actually enjoy it is to come to the launch tomorrow night of the new issue, so you can pick up a copy and see it for yourself. Because that's what these magazines need. They need you to pick them up and enjoy them. And I'm going to get into that a little bit later. Okay, so this is Stack. Every month, actually around this time, so the magazines have just gone out for May. And people start posting pictures on Twitter and Instagram. Lots of cats tend to pop up in these pictures. Lots of cups of coffee and things like that. And this is my favorite time of the month, because this is when we actually start to see the magazines in people's lives and people interacting with the magazines. And some people do that in a very kind of deliberate way. So, you know, kind of you'll get lots of people at their desks. So they want to show you, they want to show the world the magazine that's just arrived, but they want to show the world their desk as well, and like the cool stuff they've got around their desk. Some people do it in kind of like a fun sort of punning way. So this is a food magazine from Brooklyn called Put an Egg on It. And as you can see, someone has put an egg on it. As a kind of, and basically the reason this all really started out is people were doing this anyway. People were like posting their pictures, but we realized that and started incentivizing it. So now every month we publish our favorite pictures at the end of the month, and the winner gets a t-shirt. And you can't buy a Stack t-shirt, you have to win it by doing a fun thing like this. And people genuinely compete for these t-shirts. Like they get sort of like into it and competitive. And I'm here today to talk to you about a publishing revolution, because there's something really exciting happening at the moment in independent magazines. And as with any kind of industry and any kind of change, there's good news and there's bad news. So the good news is this. I'll get out of the way of the screen. The good news is that, so these are all independent magazine shops from around the UK. A couple of them, so Artwords here and Magma over there have been around for sort of 10 years. But all the rest of these have opened in the last couple of years. And that really excites me, because these are small independent businesses that are opening to sell magazines that are made as small independent businesses. It's this complete outsider kind of perspective. When I started in making magazines 15 years ago, I had to work for a publishing company to get my thoughts out into the world, because you had to have the apparatus of a publisher behind you to get stuff done. These days that just doesn't apply anymore. Technology's come along and massively democratized magazine publishing. You know, I do a lot of talking to students and tell them that, you know, back when I started, when you called in an image, you literally had to pick up the phone and call someone and say, hey, could I have some pictures of a vending machine falling on somebody, which is a genuine request I made for a story I was doing once. And then the next day, some transparencies would arrive in the post, and you'd take them to the guy in the corner, and he'd scan them, and that was your image. to anyone coming up through journalism school like today, that is just nonsense. They can't believe that the world used to be like that. You know, these days you've got a laptop, you've got an internet connection, you've got the tools at your disposal to make a magazine, and this is the result. You know, all of these magazines, and you can see they're absolutely like floor to ceiling, wall to wall in these places, are made by small, dedicated groups of people who love what they're doing. You know, people are not publishing these magazines to make a lot of money. They're doing it because they can't stand the idea of the world without their magazine in it. And that, for me, is a fantastic filter. When you've got that filter of people only making stuff because they love it and care about it, that means you stand a decent chance that there's going to be something interesting in there. So that's the good news. The bad news is exactly the same. The bad news is that it's become easier than ever to actually make your magazine, but that means it's become harder than ever to reach an audience with that magazine. Every single one of these magazines on these shelves here is competing with every single other magazine for the reader's time. And they're not just competing with every single magazine, they're competing with every YouTube channel, with every, I don't know, like blog post that comes their way, with every little bit of content that wants a piece of your time. Because the reality is we live in a world today where we're absolutely awash with content. There's nobody out there who's saying, I just really wish I had something else to read today. Everybody's completely overwhelmed. So if you are one of these publishers, you need to be really, really sure and certain that you know how you're actually going to get your magazine in front of the readers that are the right readers for you. And I'll come on to it in a bit, but that's something that Stack tries to help with. The bad news also with this is that these magazines all have to actually physically get to these shops. And Agnes, I'm sure, will tell you that is a whole world of hurt in and of itself. These magazines are like, you know, individually they don't weigh that much, but you put a box of them together and they weigh a ton. And if they get a little bit of water on them, they're destroyed. And they're a nightmare, an absolute nightmare. And so basically, whereas technology's come along and completely revolutionized all media, it's like shaking up all media, everyone knows that. But whereas with video, for example, technology's come along and like shaking up the TV and the movie industries, it's also provided ways to get that content out to the world. So, you know, everyone now has access to YouTube, to Vimeo, to these platforms where you can, if you want, and lots of people are, making their own small independent businesses out of making video content. The same doesn't apply with print magazines. Technology's come along, shaken it up, given people the tools to make their own stuff, but then there comes a day when these magazines arrive and you've probably printed several thousand of them and they've got to go somewhere. They take up this, I mean, I know a guy who, the only way he could do it is he got rid of the frame of his bed and just lay his mattress on top of the boxes of magazines. So it's the only way he could store them. And that's not a very healthy way to live. So this is a problem that we have with magazines. But of course, that's not really the bad news, because the really bad news looks like this. Most magazine shops don't look like that. Most magazine shops look like this. Absolute riot of color and stuff and sweeties, and like this was not put together for somebody to carefully choose a magazine. I know there are very lovely magazines in amongst this lot, but you wouldn't know it because the context just isn't there. It's like all these magazines have been shoved on the shelf together, and you're expected to try to do the work yourself. So this is the kind of context that magazine makers are working in today. That was my bad news slide up until a couple of weeks ago. I was going through Gatwick Airport and saw this. Someone has decided, actually, let's just forget these magazines altogether. Let's put chocolates in there instead, so 3 for £10. And this is a magazine shop, which I'm not just like selectively cropped out the magazines. There was not a single magazine in this entire shop. So this is the world that we're living in. So, you know, here I come and I give you all this bad news. So what's the solution? I have a 3-year-old son, so I see the entire world through the prism of Disney Pixar. And that's why, for me, this is independent magazines. Independent magazines are beautiful freaks and weirdos who, you get some big ones and some little ones, and some cool ones and some geeky ones, and you get some, like this chap here, who, I don't even know what that is. But, as we all know from watching Monsters University, the whole point of life is for us to understand and appreciate our differences and to play to those differences and work together and recognize them. And that sounds very corny, but is, I believe, the secret to selling these magazines. You can't just shove them on a shelf next to each other and expect them to look after themselves. You need to spend time with them to understand them, appreciate them, and then you can communicate that to people, and you can help these magazines actually find their audience. So to bring that into kind of real life, and I hope you can sort of see, is there a comparison there? Sort of, you can see some similarities. So these are the magazines that we've sent out on Stack over the last 12 months. You can see Benji Newman here. There's Put an Egg on It that we mentioned already. There's The Gourmand, which is a very beautiful food and drink magazine made in London. There's Pilot, which is a fashion magazine, which promises to only print analog photography. And never retouch for beauty. And that is obviously partly as a response to this kind of backlash against Photoshop that we've seen with especially women's beauty being criticized for presenting kind of very unrealistic images of women. But that's not to say that Pilot is being like completely sort of pure and like, sort of like a Dove advert, like we want to show like sort of real women. Actually, the photography that's in Pilot is every bit as manipulated, but all that manipulation takes place in the camera or in the shoots. So there's this huge craft and love that goes into making these like weird, outlandish images, and then they stitch all that together in a fashion magazine. So this is the sort of stuff that I think is really interesting, and the challenge is how you actually get that in front of people. So the beauty of Stack is that, there's some statistic that the average decision to buy a magazine is taken in like 3.5 seconds, because that's the amount of time it takes for you to flip through like this. With Stack, it is delivered to your house. And, we're all very busy and everything, but it can sit on your bedside table for 3 weeks until you've got that bit of time to sit down with it, and then you can actually appreciate it. Which is what you see the Stack subscribers doing here with their photography, showing what they love about the magazines. But that's kind of, that's great and everything, but that's 12 magazines, and I've just been talking to you about an explosion of creativity. We need to do more than just send out 12 magazines in a year. So last year, we started another service called Sampler. Sampler is essentially a weekly flash sale. It goes live every Thursday morning at 8 o'clock UK time, and it closes every Sunday evening at midnight UK time. So if you go to sampler.stackmagazines.com, you will see this week's sale. Well, I think we have sort of like about 20 copies left because we have a very limited number of copies each time. And it's really an opportunity to explore niche. So for this one, we've gone with a magazine called Monoculture, which is made in Berlin. And each issue is just one interview with one creative person. And they go like super deep into what that person is all about. This one is with a ceramicist, an artist. And so they've made the magazine have this kind of like, it's printed on a lovely sort of like white paper, which is both matte on one side and gloss on the other, which is supposed to evoke the kind of the glazed and the unglazed states of ceramics. And they go into like this minute detail with beautiful stuff. So whereas with Stack, we have to send out fairly broad kind of things. So, I'm sending this to people all over the place, don't know who they are. With Sampler, we can afford to go much more in depth. Because ultimately, if you receive the email and you don't like that magazine, you just won't buy it. Fine, that's no problem. Probably, 50 times in a year, you'll receive the email and delete it. But there'll be that 1 or 2 times per year where we send the magazine to you and you're like, oh, this is me, this is the magazine for me. And so basically to incentivize it, we make it very, very simple for you to just order now. You get free delivery to the UK, Europe, and USA, because one of the problems that publishers face is that they make these magazines, say you've made like a £10 magazine. Someone in the States wants to buy a copy, it's going to cost them maybe £5 or £6 to have that copy delivered to the US. That's an obvious impediment. So because we're working at volume, we're able to take that away. So we basically have provided the free shipping just to kind of make it as easy as possible for someone to try one of these new magazines. We've also added in this bar here, which you can't properly see. That says only 9 copies remaining. So we have a limited number of copies, because another problem that publishers face is that they print their magazine, and the first weeks of a magazine being out are the most important. That's when the publishers really need to sell the copies. So that's why you start seeing the emails going like, oh, hey, new issue, it's come out, buy a copy. But everybody implicitly knows that you've just printed several thousand copies of that. So in a warehouse somewhere, there's loads of copies, there's no rush, I'm going to wait, I'm going to get paid next week, and then the moment is lost. With this, you can see there's only 9 copies left. So if you miss out on this one, then that's it, it's gone. So you'll miss your free shipping. We do 10% off the cover price as well. This, incidentally, is a magazine from Spain called Perdiz, which is a magazine all about happiness. So it's not like the happiness issue. The entire magazine is dedicated to what makes people happy. But it's not kind of like fluffy happy. It's these weird people who are kind of outsiders who are just following their absolute dream to the exclusion of all else. It's very hard to describe what makes it special, but if you see a copy, you appreciate it. So this is another thing that we've added in, and there's tons of stuff that we need to do to make it better, but it's been taken up really well so far. And so this is kind of what gets me excited, the idea of kind of putting more of these magazines in front of people, helping people to try them for the first time. I'll leave you with this because, so this is the frontispiece to Thomas More's Utopia, which was published 500 years ago this year. And in it, of course, Thomas More sort of posits this kind of, this radical idea of a land where like sort of all is well and all is good. And it really strikes me that when this was published, print publishing, as we know it now, was about 100 years old. So relatively new technology, but it was absolutely, there was no argument that, you know, putting ink on paper and then sending it around the place was the best way to communicate your words and ideas. It was the fastest, it was the cheapest, it was the best way to do it. That is obviously not the case anymore today. Things have come along that are much cheaper and faster and easier to use to get your ideas out there. But the appeal for me is in using those tools, so the stuff that the web has given us, to try to sell those print magazines and the special things that exist within them. People all around the world are taking to print and discovering it for themselves in a new way, which is something that I find like massively exciting. And I think that we've got a long way to go in helping these magazines reach their audiences. This is me on Instagram and Twitter. Please follow if you'd like to know more. And that reputation code, if you put that in on the Stack website, that gets you 10% off our subscription prices, which you may want to do, I don't know. I told you I was going to promote it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stephen. I've got a question for you, and maybe if someone in the audience has a question, please raise your hand. I've got a very quick question. Have you measured the test of people that are receiving your magazine, how they will subscribe to get more copies of the same magazine? Have you measured this loyalty factor?
So no, I haven't measured it. Anecdotally, it happens. So the publishers, actually it's more common that publishers say that once they've been out on Stack, there's a more general awareness. So because they've been on Stack, it gets a little boost like that. Typically you might get, say, 10 people subscribe. But I should say that there are only 3,500 subscribers to Stack. So, I mean, the numbers are so small. It would, I'm very careful when I talk to publishers not to say, do this because you're going to sell lots of subscriptions.
Yeah. Has anyone got Rod? Can someone bring a microphone to the first row, Rod? It was meaning great presentation. No.
Okay.
No, because it's since it is live broadcast. Our friends who are watching this on the internet needs to understand your
Sorry, distant friends. Interesting that you mentioned, the rush back to printed in the same way as you have the slow food movement, the move back to vinyl. Is it back to vinyl, to vinyl? Do you feel that those three things are part of a broader trend? And if so, what are the other parts of that wave that you're seeing?
Yeah, I think it's a response to the fact that life has sped up. I mean, I don't think that anyone would kind of argue that today our lives are faster than they were 5 years ago even. I'd get slightly wary of comparing print to vinyl, for example. It's a very appealing comparison to make. There's lots of stuff that they do have in common, like, vinyl has all that space for the lovely artwork. It's about sitting down and listening very carefully to something rather than just like quickly consuming. But the big difference, I think, is that vinyl genuinely went away. Like people had CDs, people had like tapes. Vinyl really is only a thing that you go for if you're a mega fan. Like, nobody buys vinyl just because it's the best way to play music. With print, I think that print never went away in that same way. And I think that the thing we have to be careful with is that these independent print magazines look a lot like a mainstream magazine. It's like it's paper that's bound on one side, but when you look at what they are as businesses, they are completely different. These are 21st century businesses that are growing up sort of through the cracks of the mess that's been left by big corporate publishing. And so I think that's kind of an important distinction. But I absolutely agree that it's part of a broader and wider trend.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Thank you very much. Thank you for doing this. Thank you.